Hello everyone and welcome to Blue Tengu's live development show. This is episode 2. We started last week, but this is the show where we show everything that goes into making a game from concept to completion. If you've ever wanted to make a game, we hope this will help lower the barrier to entry, maybe give you the nudge you need to try it yourself. Even if you don't want to make a game, we hope you'll find some value in what we're doing here. All of the information about where you can find us is in the Twitch info down below, or in our YouTube profile for those of you who are catching us later. But just in case, we're at www.bluetengu.com, that's all one word. btengu on Twitter, facebook.com Blue Tengu Studio, youtube.com Blue Tengu Studio for those of you who are watching the live stream now and want to catch maybe last week's episode or see bits and pieces of this episode again later. And Twitch TV Blue Tengu for those of you who are watching us on YouTube and want to try out the live stream. Before I go any further, I should take a minute to explain why this 2-hour format. I did explain it a little bit last week, but it's worth explaining again. By not keeping things short, I'll definitely scare off a few viewers, but I think the people who want to see briefer snippets of game development or quicker tutorials or professionals who already know what they're doing just kind of in their process, there's plenty of options on YouTube and even Twitch. In an age where Vine has decided the average net user's attention span is about 6 seconds, doing a 2-hour-a-week show definitely goes against the trend. Maybe it does, and this won't be for everyone, but I hope for those of you who are sticking around to watch, you get something out of it that you won't get out of 6-second clips or tutorial videos. And I hope you'll hang with me and learn with me so we can start making the games we've always wanted to make. Like I said last time, the goal of this is to show not just the results of the learning, but the learning process as well. To try and show what it's like to have something you want to do without a clear idea of how it's done in advance, because that's where most people start. If anything, I hope it makes it easier to ask questions, because I'm definitely not some guy with a gray beard standing in front of a podium in a classroom or anything, and I hope it shows you that whatever I can do, you can do. Thank you last week to Rooney Clip and Jamorian for making some suggestions and asking some great questions. Hopefully I get some more today. If you're watching this live, feel free to ask questions at any time. I may not be able to answer them right away because this week I'll be getting into the actual work. But I'll try to get to them at some point. And if I can't, you can send me a private message here, even when I'm off the air, or leave a comment on our, bluetengu.com site, or under the YouTube video if you're watching this later. And I'll do my best to address it, either directly or next time, if it seems like something that everyone would be interested in. By the way, if any of you are out there making something and you don't mind showing it off, send me a link to your stuff. I'd love to see it. I'd like playing anything, so. And, if it's just concept art, whatever, love to see it. Last week, we went through planning a game. In this case, it's called Project Spaghetti, hence the name in the Twitch feed. It's the concept anyway, because we don't actually have a game in place yet until we start working on it, is, the thing in my mind is a top-down 2D cowboy shooter, where the bullets fired bounce around the screen, and with a pinball mechanic. So, there might be like these bumper kind of things, like you maybe just hit the wall and it bounces off, and that kind of adds to the points that you're going to get. I went through the basics of what I wanted to make last week, brainstormed a bit using a free program called FreeMind, which I have confirmed is open source. I wasn't completely sure last week, but it is open source. Then I mapped all of those bubbles that I made in that mind map out into an online bulletin board called Trello.com. Let me bring that up. This site, Trello.com, and the board is public. The links are, on bluetengu.com, or I should be able to put them down on the Twitch feed or somewhere else, and I'll probably throw an annotation into YouTube. So you can follow along with my to-do list, though. If you're doing this, and you don't need to show, the world what you're planning or what you're doing, it's actually much faster and probably a lot more efficient to put things on good old-fashioned like post-it notes and paste them on a board or a wall somewhere where you can freely move them around to change priorities or change like the time estimates that go into them. if you did miss last week's episode, don't worry. It's up on our YouTube page. Like I said, youtube.com Blue Tengu Studio, all one word. But you don't need any of that background for what I'm doing today. It's enough to know that I made a to-do list, which is right here. And today is when I dive in and start doing things. Last week, the things I made my highest priority are the things I need to get to make this game playable. That means a rough background, something for the player to walk around on. And I need a rough player. And probably the next step after that would be something to fire, so I'm going to need to draw a rough bullet. And I'm going to need to dump all of these assets into a program called Game Maker, which is what I hope to be an easy-to-use game engine for making 2D games. If you want to know why I picked Game Maker over Unity or Unreal, check out last week's episode on YouTube. So let's get started. My first task is actually is something I need to address before I start making anything else. That's the resolution of the game I want to make. Do I make this game, 1280 by 720 or 800 by 600 or 640 by 480? All the standard, PC resolutions, or go even higher, which would be kind of ridiculous for a 2D game. Or if I was doing this on iPhone stuff, would I want it to go for 480 by 320 for like an iPhone 3, 640 by 960 for iPhone 4, 640 by 1136 for the iPhone 5, or worry about Android resolutions and all that stuff? Obviously, the ideal would be to make something that can ignore resolution without a bunch of just sticking on borders on the side or whatever. But I'm not quite comfortable enough with this process yet to do that. Part of this game, I like the Commodore 64, and I think a lot of the game is going to be influenced by it. So, part of me is tempted to try, the old, what is it, 160 by 200 resolution. But that's going to look a little silly on a PC in this day and age. So, and it's going to be very tiny, or it's going to look weird. So I'm tempted to try it, but I'm going to try to keep the Commodore spirit alive as much as possible without, being chained to it. So instead of worrying about getting stuck with the resolution, I'm going to try to stick to the original palette on the Commodore 64 and not worry about the resolution so much. To keep things simple, I'm going to shoot for 320 by 240, and the reason for that is, multiply it by 2 and you get 640 by 480. And I'm going to hope that a later increase in resolution by scaling everything up will give me a nice kind of retro blocky quality. To be honest, I'm still not 100% sure what I'll like, so I'm going to make resolution one of those things the rough art is going to help me pin down. That's the whole point of doing rough art in the first place. In general, if you're making a game for the PC, you don't have to worry about resolution so much as the ratio. For example, like the width 4, by height 3, so that 4:3 ratio, which is like the old television ratio and stuff like that. 640 by 480, 800 by 600, all of those are that, and that's for older monitors, which I have, unfortunately. But on most modern monitors and most modern resolutions, anything HD, it's 16 by 9, which is your 720 and 1080 and everything else. So that 320 by 240 I picked is a 4 by 3 ratio. Later on, I might consider making an extra set of sprites. The graphics that go into the game. Make an extra set that works in 16 by 9. But that comes later, after I've got the gameplay locked down and I've made my 4 by 3 sprites. As a rule for me anyway, gameplay comes first, graphics come next. So first off, I'm going to make a simple background. I kind of have an idea for the layout I want. I do want to have skies and buildings. Okay, I guess OBS cut me off for a few seconds there for some reason. Maybe it was a Twitch server thing. I think I'm back. Okay, I'll assume I'm back because it looks fine. Not sure what that's going to do to the video afterwards, but let me backtrack a little bit just in case, Twitch cut some of that stuff off. So, I said first off, I'm going to make a simple background. I kind of have an idea for the layout I want. I do want skies and buildings, so I can't just make a giant, grid of like yellow dirt with like brown dots in it or something for sand and call it a day. I do need to define like the ground part, and then on top of that probably the sky and the building part. So let me jump into that. I'm going to, how should I go about this? I guess it's probably just easier to switch to my desktop, so I'm going to do that. Okay, switching to the desktop. The reason, by the way, I'm keeping OBS open in the corner there is just so I know when the stream does cut off, so I'm just not talking to myself or whatever. I don't have two monitors to do this on, so I do have like the chat in my notebook, but so sorry if you get kind of a weird, inception effect with the way windows overlap and everything else. But so I'm going to get started on the background. First, before I do that, I do have, let's see, I should probably go over to Trello here. So on Trello.com, I have moved some of those tasks over to an episode 2 list. I estimated those tasks last week, assuming, certain things will take half an hour, certain things will take 15 minutes or whatever. That's all just an estimation. But to know how good my estimating is, which I have to track, I'm going to basically move everything that I plan on doing, or at least that should fit into, this 2-hour chunk of time. Well, it's not quite 2 hours because I have a little chit-chat in the beginning, but, I'm going to move it over into this episode 2 list. Like right now I have about an hour and 45 minutes worth of tasks, at least by estimation. And when you are working with Agile, which I explained last week, one of the important things is to keep track of how long things did take in the end. And it's also important to stick to, keeping your tasks under how much time you have to do them. So if I have 2 hours, part of me thinks if I'm just making a background image and I'm just putting that background image into GameMaker and I'm just drawing a player, I could probably get that player into the game. It's not going to take very long, but things happen, and I want to stick to my original estimation. If I do get ahead of time, then fine, I can bring that task over into episode 2. But all right, well, we decided the resolution, which we're going to start with 320 by 200. So that's done. And next, I'm going to work on the background image here. So let's minimize that. There are different programs you can use. Some of you have, let's see, some of you are going to have a Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever. Some of you are only going to be working with Paintbrush because it's free. If you want something a little more powerful than Paintbrush, that's still free. There's a program called Krita, for example. Krita is free. There's also a program called Graphic Scale, which I think the basic features are free, but then everything after that isn't. There's also a program called GIMP, which is free, and it kind of emulates everything in Photoshop. I'm not really comfortable in working with any of those, and since I do want to get a game made, I kind of thought about it a little bit, but I think I want to just go with Photoshop because it's what I know. So I'm going to open that now. Okay, so I got my empty screen here. Since I want to make a background, and that resolution is 320 by, let's see, 640, 480, 240. I'm just going to make the blank screen, I'll just call it background. Town background. Okay, so now I've just got this empty, scary white square here. And let's see, I'm going to want to turn on some grids because this is going to be a pixely look, so I want to kind of pay attention to pixels. So you can do that with, like, if you're in Photoshop. I'm sure all the other programs have ways to do it too, but if you're in Photoshop, it's usually View and Show, and then there's a grid. And I don't know if I have it set to 1 pixel or not. I think you can check that over here in Edit, Preferences, Guides, Grids, and Slices. Yeah, okay, so I've got a grid line every 1 pixel and just 1 subdivision. So I should be fine. Like if you zoom in here, each of those is a pixel in the final product. So let's see. Like I said, I do want to have a game area, and all of those are going to have to be the same for the stages. So let's see. I'm also going to want to bring in the Commodore 64 palette. I think I saved it here. Alright, there we go. I've basically found this image on the net. Basically, the Commodore 64 back in the day had 16 colors that you could choose from. I haven't done many graphics or anything on the Commodore 64, so if someone knows better than me, feel free to jump in and tell me, but I think it had like 16 colors, and these are the 16 colors. So I kind of want to stick to the palette just to give it that Commodore 64 look, at least for the game. And since I'm going to start with a town, I'm going to start with the dirt, which, you know, based on these 16 colors, the closest thing I can get to dirt is probably this yellow. So I'm going to dump that in. Yeah, great. That would be very unexciting if that's my playfield, but it's a good start. Oh, I should probably mention brushes. If you are going for a pixel look, you're going to have to be careful about which brush you pick. I did add in all of these like square brushes. You're going to want a square brush because if it's round, obviously, you know, everything you draw is going to have these weird edges to it. So I did bring those in. I think you can bring them in from here if you pick brushes. There's probably some way to do that. In fact, it is worth looking that up. Photoshop. I don't know how people did anything before Google. I have Photoshop CS2, so let's add that. So, like, for example, if you wanted to look it up, there's obviously videos, which would probably be faster if you watch someone else do it. There you go. File, Adobe, Photoshop, Presets, Brushes. So that's how you can go about doing that. But I did do that before because I was practicing with pixel art, so they are already in here. I added them to the end, and they're all nice square brushes. So let's see. I'm gonna want dirt, like spots in the dirt, so I'm gonna pick a brown color. Actually, I don't want to have huge spots in the dirt because then it'll get kind of confusing. Like probably if there's big spots in the dirt, you know, it'll start blending in with the characters and you won't be able to see anything. And let's see. There's smarter ways to do this, but I'm just going to... Actually, no. There are smarter ways to do this. And I shouldn't be working everything in the background layer either. I should create a new layer. And one good habit to get into is to actually name your layers as you go so you don't have to worry about it later. What is that shortcut? I think it was K, but I'm not sure. No, that's something else. So just so I can copy and paste this, I'm just going to put a bunch of dirt splotches down here. I did, by the way, while I'm doing this part, I did change the microphone level. I think last week it was probably a little too loud. So I did drop it a bit, but if I'm, too quiet now, let me know so I can change that. There are definitely smarter ways to do this, like using noise, for example, but I just want to get something in there, so I don't want to look up how to make noise with dirt and everything else, so this is an easy way to do it. And as long as I just kind of paste in a random pattern, it should be alright. And I'll combine those layers later. And this is the part where I explained, why it's going to kind of buck the trend to do this show this way, because obviously if there's, if this was a tutorial or something, then someone would have already investigated the fastest way to do this and would just be showing that. Like I said, the concept of the show is to show that, I'm doing things the hard way too, so you don't have to be afraid of getting started, even if you're not, a professional that knows what you're doing. And this is like I explained last week, and like Jamorian mentioned in last week's show as well. It's better to do rough art first rather than worrying about final art. So this may probably not going to be the final image that goes into the game. I just need something basic to test out gameplay. From that perspective, maybe it's not even worth doing like dirt splotches or whatever, but I kind of want to test, what this looks like in the game as well. So, and I'm going to save as I go. So town background PSD, yeah, that's fine. Now that gives me a giant field with dirt in it, but like I said, I want sky and buildings. So, now comes the interesting part of how do I get exactly a certain amount of space at the top that I can duplicate. Because obviously if I just click and drag, I don't know how many pixels this is, do I? No. How about this? How about this? Just use a giant brush. And let's see, a good Commodore 64 sky color. Probably that. And I know that this brush is 24, so... Oh, one other thing I should do. I should also use Snap to Grid. I've got all those things turned on. I've got Snap to on. That way I'm not, leaping around pixels. Also, if you're using Photoshop, if you hold down Shift, you won't have to worry about, up and down movement as long as you're going left and right. So I'm going to line that up with the corner. Yeah, it snapped me a little too down. I'm going to line that up with the corner. There we go. So as you can see, I'm holding down Shift right now as I'm moving across. So that's 24 pixels. Let's do another 24. And what does that look like? It's not quite enough yet. Okay. Just want to be careful not to overlap. Yeah, there we go. That's probably about as much sky as I want because I don't want to take away too much from the actual play field. And, I might determine later on that because the game is not just a shooter, but because you have, it's going to require the bullet to bounce around, that maybe having buildings in the sky is not going to be the way to go, but that's part of what I want to test here. Yeah, let's throw in some rough buildings, just so I know what that's going to look like. Oh, good building color. None of these are quite ideal, but if they did it back in the Commodore 64 days, I'm sure it can be done. I'm not going to want gaps between the buildings, even though it would look more natural, because then the bullet would be able to fly right through those, at least visually. See, there we go, I'm not holding down Shift. Yeah, the snap to the grid thing's kind of getting in the way now. Actually, I should have moved that onto a different layer. That was a mistake, wasn't it? Yes, it was. I wonder if I can back out far enough. So just to keep that where it is, and now I'm going to see if I can back out here. How should I do this? Make sure it's not getting rid of this. Okay, good. Nope, can't back out far enough, so I'm not going to worry about it then. I'll just copy and move it to a new layer. Getting ahead of myself. So let's turn those buildings off. Let's get rid of all of this, bring that dirt back, and copy a good swath of dirt splotches that I can copy and paste back up there. Because I may want to adjust that size as I go to test the game and stuff. So even though this is a rough image, it's probably worth doing it in layers. I may never even see this stuff, but it's worth doing. Yep, okay. Now let's bring those buildings back. Let's change to that layer. Probably wasting too much time making these buildings and stuff, so probably the important thing is just that line between, you know, where the buildings start and stop, as opposed to what the buildings themselves look like, as long as there's no gaps. And one other thing I did mention last week, when you're doing graphics, especially rough graphics, and you haven't worked out the gameplay yet, the uglier the better, because if you do make it look cool, you're not going to want to change it later. You'll start to resist, you know, changing things because you don't want to undo the work you've done, and you're not going to know if your game's actually good or not. You might actually trick yourself with fancy graphics. You know, with as bad as this looks, I'm not going to be tricking myself that the game's awesome if the game itself is not fun. So I think it's a good start. Let's see, that's probably all I need for now. You know, obviously the final product's not just going to be a bunch of like horribly drawn simple squares. You know, you're going to have roofs and doors and signs and everything like that, but you know, who knows how much of this is going to change, so it's not worth going to all that much work. But I think that should do for my simple background. Let me save that as probably PNG so I can use, there's different file formats. PNG is usually the best one to use if you're working with like 2D graphics, because PNGs have a transparency layer, so if you're making a character that's not a perfect square or anything, you know, whatever you don't draw in is just going to get cut out by the rendering part of the program. So you can actually get a character that looks right. And I think GameMaker can interpret those sprites so whatever's transparent doesn't get involved in the collision part of it. So, you know, if your bullet comes in and your character's head is only this big, even if the actual sprite you put in there is, you know, this giant square, the bullet's not actually going to do anything until it hits that part where it's drawn in, which is important. Okay, so town background PNG. There we go. That was quick. So let's go over to Trello. So the next thing is to put it in the game. I did draw a background rough, but I'm not entirely sure if that task is done yet until I actually try to put it in the game, so I'm going to keep that in progress for now. And fire up GameMaker. So, I do have GameMaker Pro, but everything I'm doing, I believe, is in the standard version. It used to be there were 3 versions. I think a free version, a standard version, and a pro version. There wasn't a huge difference between free and standard, but they great guys at Yo-Yo Games made standard free, so now you pretty much have everything you need. I don't even know if there are that many things in the pro version until you start to get around to actually trying to distribute your game or make it or something that are different between the standard version. But Yo-Yo Games puts GameMaker up on sale all the time, so I think the pro version's about, shoot, how much is it? It's under 100, but they put it on sale for like half off all the time, so just, you know, if you can, wait for one of those and, you know, pick it up for the price of, you know, a new game basically. So I'm going to start a new project. Project Spaghetti. Okay, so jumping into GameMaker, this is the screen. Last week I tried to go through this screen and explain it, but I didn't have the right window open, so I should explain it now. You know, I haven't actually completed a game in GameMaker, which is why I'm doing this, so I can see if I can do it. But I do kind of know the basics of it. You've got your sprites here, like the player that I'm going to draw later. This is where the graphics going to go. I think this is also where like the animation and everything else for sprites is handled. Sounds, self-explanatory. That's where you're going to drop all of your like wave files and things like that. Backgrounds, that's where I'm going to want to drop in that town that I just made. Paths, that's more for like, I think, enemy AI and stuff like that. Scripts, that's where all your custom scripts go. Shaders, that may be in just the pro version, I'm not sure, but shaders are basically, when light falls on something, the way that, the way an object is like rendered. So you don't just have a flat color, it might, add a little blur around the side, or it might, render some kind of hatching or, things like that. I'm not sure if I'm even going to need that. Fonts, self-explanatory. Timelines, I'm not too sure what that's for. That's something I'll have to look up. Objects are going to be basically everything that the game works with. Like a sprite is just a graphic, so the game doesn't know what to do with that. If you have a player graphic, the game doesn't know what that means. You put the player there, a bullet graphic passes through the player graphic, and it's like, it's just graphics moving around. To actually make that a player that gets hit by a bullet, you have to make everything into an object. So it's kind of like the encapsulating thing that makes everything happen in the game. So later when I make a player, I'm going to have to make an object out of it, and that's also where you attach like all the game maker scripts and stuff. Like, if you press up on the keyboard, it moves the character up. Rooms, the equivalent of objects and sprites, that relationship is the equivalent between rooms and backgrounds. A background is just a graphic, but to actually have, the rules for this space that you're playing in, you have to create a room. That's one of the first things you actually have to do. And if you don't have a room, you can't even run anything. Included files and extensions, I think that's just if you want to do more stuff with Game Maker. If you have external files and things like that. Constants. Constants are the variables that don't change. If you want to define, for example, in a jumping platforming game, what is gravity? Is it 9.8 meters per second square? Meters squared per second. Then you can define, gravity 9.8 here, and then whenever you use that word anywhere in any of your scripts, anywhere in the game, you know what it means. It's the same thing. You can define resolution, things like that here. So, first thing is background. That town that I did, I need to bring that in. So I'm going to right-click, create a background. I could edit it from here, but I'm going to load that one that I just did. And that's that. It even knows the resolution. Width 320, height 240. I don't want to use it as a tile set. Let me show you what that is. Basically what a tile set is like that opening thing that I did in RPG Maker, where the characters are kind of running around and stuff. RPG Maker, for example, uses tile sets. What it is it's a way to save, memory and everything else. If you have a lot of small objects, you don't want to just create a new file for each of those objects because you're going to waste a lot of space. So what a tile set does is you can use one graphic file and have all those little things in there, like a chair, a bed, a barrel. In our case, for example, we might be using this later. Barrel, little objects and things, and you can, define them on this little grid here. You can change, what's being used and everything else. It's basically a memory saving feature. Let's see, tile, horizontal. Obviously, I don't need 3D texture group. Yeah, alright, I think that's fine. All I just have to do is have a background. That was easy. And I'm going to need to create a room from this background. Let's see, I think that's how you're supposed to do it. Foreground image. It's kind of a weird way to say it. Okay, so now we see that this right now, it's set at 640 by 480, I think, which is why it's coming in twice. So I'm going to need to change that somewhere. Yep, 640 by 480. So 320 by 240. 320 by 240. And Does that update? Do I need to do this? There's a checkbox. Nope. Oh, well, there we go. That's easy. Okay, there we go. Now I've got my 320 by 240. Obviously extremely tiny, especially on a modern monitor. 320 by 240 is very tiny. Bear with me. My experiment is to try and do everything in 320 by 240 and then just scale everything up by 2 so that the pixels actually stand out as pixels. So I'm going to keep it small for now instead of worrying about that. Objects, I'm not going to have to worry about that until I actually have something to dump in the game. Physics, you can define physics here, but like that gravity constant I mentioned, you can define that here, but I'm not going to need to worry about gravity since it's top-down. Okay, so, alright, yeah. When I was first doing that 320 by 240 thing, I was doing it in the Views tab, and I think the way views work is if you have a giant map and you're only seeing part of that at a time, you define that view, that view size. So even if you have a 640 by 480 map and you have a 320 by 240 view, you've still got the map, but as your character moves or as whatever camera controller you're using moves, that little view window that you define here in views is what moves with it. So I'm going to call this town. And okay. Until I have a player in here, I'm not going to know if that's right or not. So I'm going to go back to my task list here. I've got town level, background image. I put the town level in the game, but again, until I have a player in here, I'm not really comfortable ending these tasks. It's probably a bad habit to just keep filling in the in progress thing, but I can't think of another way to do it because I don't want to move these to done. Probably the proper way to do it would be in advance to break these out into probably 2 steps. One would be an insertion graphic and the other would be like a rough graphic. So now I'm going to move on to doing a player. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop. I'm going to keep that town background open for now, just so I have some kind of reference. I'm going to call this player. And here's another resolution decision. I have 320 by 240. So how big do I want this character? If I want to go for the original Commodore 64 size, that I think was 24 wide by 21 high pixels. But since I'm not going for the original Commodore resolution, that's probably not going to fit. It's going to look weird and squashed out. Let's see what it looks like. It's obviously going to look tiny. Let's fill that in. And bring that over. So if I did do a character that was 24 wide by 21 high, this is as big as it can look. The original Commodore resolution of 320 by 200. Oh, actually 160 by 200. I think 320 was the fancy mode. But well, maybe it was 320. But anyway, the characters are going to look very wide because they were designed for a mode that would have a different height and width and that aspect ratio as they call it. So not going to worry about that. I don't want to emulate that too much. I think if I made a character that looked like that, it would be too fat in general. So that might be a little weird. In general, I practiced a little bit with drawing pixel characters, and that original Commodore height of 21 pixels is about the minimum you need to actually make a character that looks like a human being. Like if you're going to have a head, a neck, a torso, arms, legs that are moving, 21 is about the minimum that you need to convey all that. Otherwise, you have to start losing parts. You know, if you're not doing a humanoid character, then it probably doesn't matter as much. But let's assume, let's say for example, I had a character this size moving around the screen, dodging bullets and everything else, shooting. Is that going to work? Do I want that? I probably don't want it that wide, so what I'm going to do is, I don't need that anymore. I'm going to change this to 21 by 21. Yes, go ahead and do that. You know, I probably shouldn't go this far, but just to kind of show you and maybe help me as well get an image for what this is going to look like in the game. Let's say I had a head. What's a good? It's probably about the only human face color I have available on the Commodore palette. You know, say for example I have a head there. And I have a body like this. And since it's a Western, I'll just go ahead and give him a little hat. This isn't even rough. This is just to kind of show what this is going to look like in the game, scale-wise. Actually, I should probably show off the background. Nah, it's fine. So, if I did, you know, kind of stick to the 21 by 21 grid, it's going to give me a character that looks about this big compared to the background. In fact, the way I've got this zoomed in, let me zoom this into 200%, because if I'm planning on doubling that 320 by 240, then this is what the final result's going to look like. So that's 200%. So this is 640 by 480 that I'm looking at this now, which is what I'm shooting for in the end. And if I have a character moving around, it's going to be about this tall, and it's got a little, you know, flexibility on the sides for holding out a gun and things like that. When thinking about that, holding out a gun, well, maybe that 24 by 21 is not bad. I can always cut that down later. Yep, I'm going to do that then. That will be my resolution. I will go for the original Commodore resolution, sprite resolution of 24 by 21. You know, when the character's just standing there doing nothing with his arms at his side like this, it's more than enough room. But if he's gonna like shoot a gun or do something like that, he's gonna need to hold out his arm, and he's also probably gonna need to walk. You might need to go at an angle and shoot up at the corner. So it's probably worth having that little extra bit of space on the sides. Okay, so now let's get rid of this ugly character. And oops. Okay. So at least with the 24 by 21 grid, it's pretty easy to see where the pixels are. I should probably add all of these colors to a custom swatch or something up there so that I can just pick them from up here, but I will worry about that later. So what do I want to start with? I probably want to start with the head. And since it is blue Tengu, I'm going to go with a Tengu character. You know, for those of you who haven't played, you know, certain video games and things like that, and you don't know what a Tengu is, a Tengu is a long-nosed goblin in Japan. I live in Japan, so that's kind of why I chose Tengu, because I've used it a lot in emails and everything else. I just kind of like that idea of a long-nosed goblin that lives in the mountains. Kind of interesting. So let's see. That's way too big for a head. How much head do I want? Well, actually, I need a round head, so let's see what happens when I get rid of these. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. I probably want a neck, so let's cut a little more off. That's about right for round. Start working with a proper pixel brush here. Obviously, since he's going to have a long nose, that's probably about right. And I'll move this character a little more to the left later. Let's give him a white hat. Let's make him the good guy, because he's, you know, if people are going to be playing this guy, they probably don't want to be the bad guy. Okay, that's going to be tricky. Let me create a new layer. I said it was going to be tricky because by default, if your background is white, then you're not going to be able to tell the difference between white pixels in the background. And I didn't even have the layers separated out, so I would have just had a giant white smushy mess, which is no good. Let's just erase the background. Let's erase all those white pixels. So now I can actually see the color white when I'm working with it. And let's see, how big does this hat need to be? Let's start with that. Okay. He's got that. He does have a neck. Let's draw just a rough body in there. Actually, I should probably turn grid snapping off if it's going to be this close, because it's going to be kind of annoying to work with that grid snapping stuff. Because it's going to try and pick the best square based on where my mouse is, and it's not doing a very good job of that. Obviously, I'm going to need some space in between the legs so that you can see the individual legs, so that's going to be the minimum amount of space. But those are awfully skinny legs, so he's going to need that much width in the end. Okay, how to do arms. That looks kind of silly. And let's give him a gun. Obviously this isn't going to be the final character, it's just a rough. Do I have enough space in that head for an eye? Yep. Since an all-white character is going to be really hard to see, I'm just going to give him a little vest here. Old school cowboy style vest. Okay. If I do that, I don't have to make his arms look ridiculous either. Yeah, I guess in the end I'm going to want to have antennas, so I want to make sure his height is okay. Yep, okay. I think that's fine. It's probably about the width I need. His shoulders are going to be as wide as his head, probably. Let's give him shoes so I can see his feet better as well. Okay, that's enough for a rough character, I think. Enough to at least see what it looks like in the game and put it in there and get started. So I'm going to save that to the desktop. I'm going to grab the PNG of it, and that should keep the transparency. Okay. Now let's jump back to GameMaker. So the next step is to add it as a sprite. I'm going to take a quick break. So I will be back in just a second. I just need to refill my water. Think about the character a little bit, and it's a good stopping point so I can keep these video clips about an hour a piece on YouTube as well. So hang in with me. I'll be back in probably about a minute.